The night my parents humiliated me in front of our entire family, I finally understood something I'd been refusing to accept for years. They were never going to choose me. And the moment I stopped trying to earn their love, everything changed. My name is Claire Morgan, and I was 29 when it happened. I was standing in my parents' living room in suburban Columbus, Ohio, surrounded by relatives I barely spoke to anymore, holding a glass of cheap champagne I hadn't even wanted. The room buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and that familiar undercurrent of judgment I'd grown up swimming in. This gathering was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became the moment I quietly stepped out of my family for good. My younger sister, Natalie, sat on the couch at the center of the room, glowing with attention. She was 24 and newly engaged and very pregnant. My parents hovered around her like proud managers, beaming at every comment, laughing a little too loudly, soaking in the admiration of everyone present. Natalie had always been the golden child, beautiful, impulsive, adored. I was the opposite, responsible, invisible, useful only when something needed fixing. That night, my parents had insisted I attend. Family is everything, Claire, my mother, Linda, had said over the phone earlier that week. And Natalie wants you there. That alone should have warned me. Natalie never wanted me anywhere unless she needed something. I should explain the dynamic before going further. Growing up, I was the one who followed rules, got good grades, worked part-time jobs, and stayed out of trouble. Natalie did none of that. She dropped out of college twice, bounced between boyfriends, and moved back home more times than I could count. But somehow I was always the disappointment. I was too serious, too cold, not grateful enough. Natalie was free-spirited, misunderstood, and endlessly forgiven. By the time I was 23, I had moved out, rented a small apartment downtown, and built a quiet, stable life on my own. I worked as a financial analyst for a mid-sized firm and paid every bill myself. Natalie, meanwhile, was still financially dependent on our parents. None of that mattered. In my family, effort never beat charm. Back in the living room, my father, Richard, tapped his glass with a spoon, calling everyone's attention. Conversations faded. Natalie leaned forward, smiling knowingly. My stomach tightened. "We just want to say how proud we are," Richard began, his voice warm and practiced. Natalie has always had such a big heart, and now she's starting a family of her own. Applause filled the room. I took a small sip of champagne, already bracing myself. Linda stepped in next, placing a hand on Natalie's shoulder. And we couldn't be happier knowing she'll finally have the support she needs. Raising a child isn't easy. It takes sacrifice. Her eyes flicked toward me for just a second. I noticed. I always did. Then Richard cleared his throat again. "Which brings us to something important. Claire," he said, turning fully toward me now, "your mother and I have been talking." The room went quiet. Every head turned in my direction. My heart started pounding. "We think it's time you stepped up for your sister," he continued. "Natalie's going to need help. Financially, emotionally, and since you're doing so well for yourself." Linda cut in smoothly. "It's only fair. You don't have children. You live alone. You have savings." I felt heat rush to my face. "I'm sorry," I said carefully. "What exactly are you saying?" Natalie finally spoke, her voice soft but edged with something smug. "Mom and Dad think you could help cover some of my expenses, just until things stabilize." Someone in the room chuckled, as if this were all perfectly reasonable. "How much?" I asked, though part of me already knew this wasn't a small ask. Richard didn't hesitate. "We were thinking you could contribute $1,500 a month." The words hit me like a slap. $1,500, nearly half my rent. "I can't do that," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That's not realistic." Linda's expression shifted instantly, the warmth draining from her face. "Don't be selfish, Claire." There it was, the word that had followed me my entire life. Natalie sighed dramatically. I knew she'd react like this. Richard shook his head in disappointment. "After everything we've done for you." I looked around the room. No one defended me. No one questioned how absurd this was. They were all watching, waiting to see if I'd comply or be publicly labeled the villain. "I help when I can," I said slowly. "But I'm not responsible for supporting Natalie's lifestyle." That's when my mother laughed. actually laughed. Lifestyle? Claire, you make it sound like she's choosing this. She's pregnant. You're just single. The implication hung heavy in the air. Then came the line I will never forget. At least Natalie is giving us something to be proud of, Linda said. The room went silent again. I felt something inside me crack, clean and sharp. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded, set my glass down on the coffee table, and picked up my coat. Where are you going? Richard asked sharply. Home, I replied. Enjoy the celebration. Natalie didn't look at me as I walked past her. She didn't have to. She'd already won. I drove home in a fog, hands tight on the steering wheel, replaying every word in my head. Part of me still wanted to apologize, to fix it, to smooth things over. That instinct ran deep. But another part of me, quieter and stronger, was finally done. That night, I made a decision I didn't tell anyone about. I stopped answering family calls. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain myself. I just went quiet. For the first time in my life, I chose silence over submission. And they did not handle it well. The first voicemail came the next morning. Claire, it's Mom. Call me back. We need to talk about last night. Her tone was light, controlled, as if nothing had happened. As if she hadn't dismissed my entire life with one careless sentence. I listened to the message once, then set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and went to work. By noon, there were 4 more missed calls. 2 from my father, 1 from Natalie, 1 from a number I didn't recognize, which I later learned belonged to my aunt. I didn't return any of them. Silence, I discovered, is deeply unsettling to people who are used to controlling the narrative. That evening, I came home to an email from my father. It was longer, more formal, and dripping with disappointment. He wrote about family obligations, about loyalty, about how success changes people. He reminded me of my childhood, of the roof they'd put over my head, the food they provided, the sacrifices they'd made. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of how inappropriate their demand had been, just expectation. I closed my laptop without replying. The next few days followed the same pattern. Calls, messages, guilt wrapped in concern wrapped in accusation. Natalie sent a single text. Wow. I didn't think you'd abandon family like this. Guess I was wrong about you. That one hurt more than I expected. Not because it was true, but because it confirmed something I'd long suspected. In their eyes, my value had always been transactional. I was useful when I gave, disposable when I didn't. A week passed, then 2. The silence became noticeable. My parents stopped leaving voicemails and started showing up. The first time, it was my father alone. I came home from work to find him standing near my apartment door, hands in his coat pockets, jaw tight. Can we talk? He asked, as if this were a reasonable request. I didn't invite him in. You can say what you need to say here. His eyes flicked down the hallway, irritated. This is ridiculous. What's ridiculous? I replied calmly, is asking me to financially support an adult who refuses to support herself. He stiffened. Natalie is carrying your niece or nephew. And I wish her well, I said. But that doesn't make her my responsibility. He sighed heavily, the same way he used to when I questioned anything growing up. You've changed. Yes, I said. I have. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly recalibrating. Your mother is very hurt. I'm sure she is. You embarrassed us, he continued, walking out like that. I met his gaze. You embarrassed me first. That was the moment his patience snapped. You think you're better than us now. Because you have a good job? A quiet little apartment. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was painfully predictable. I don't think I'm better, I said. I think I'm done. He left without another word. Slammed the stairwell door hard enough to rattle the walls. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted. But underneath that exhaustion was something new. Relief. Over the next month, I focused on my own life. I threw myself into work, stayed late, took on projects I'd previously passed up. My performance reviews had always been good, but now they were exceptional. My manager started hinting at a promotion. I began saving aggressively, cutting unnecessary expenses, quietly building a cushion. What my family didn't know was that I'd already been planning a major move long before that disastrous gathering. I'd been interviewing with a firm in Chicago, one with a significantly higher salary and far more growth potential. I hadn't told anyone because instinctively I knew it would become another point of control. 3 weeks after the party, I got the offer. I signed the contract the same day. I told no one. The calls started again once Natalie's pregnancy complications became a convenient excuse. My mother left tearful messages about stress, about doctor's visits, about how Natalie needed support now more than ever. The implication was clear. I was expected to fold. Instead, I blocked their numbers. That was when the narrative shifted. Suddenly, relatives I barely spoke to began reaching out. Messages framed as concern quickly revealed their true purpose. Your parents are worried sick. Natalie is under so much pressure. Family doesn't cut each other off. No one asked how I was doing. No one questioned why I'd pulled away. The assumption was unanimous. I was the problem. I stopped responding to those messages too. 2 months later, my promotion came through. Senior analyst, a significant raise, a corner office, the kind of milestone I'd once dreamed of sharing with my family. Instead, I celebrated quietly with friends who had actually shown up for me over the years, people who didn't demand anything in return. The final confrontation came unexpectedly on a Sunday afternoon. I was packing boxes in my living room when I heard a knock. Firm, insistent. I opened the door to find Natalie standing there, very pregnant, eyes red, expression carefully rehearsed. I just want to talk, she said. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She looked around my apartment, taking it all in with thinly veiled resentment. Must be nice, she muttered. What do you want, Natalie? She sat heavily on the couch, one hand on her belly. Mom and Dad are falling apart. I said nothing. They're scared, she continued. They think they're losing you. I almost asked when they'd ever really had me, but I held my tongue. You know, she went on, this could all be fixed if you'd just help out a little. There it was, the real reason. I'm moving, I said simply. She blinked. Moving where? Chicago. Her mouth fell open. You can't be serious. I start in 6 weeks. She stood abruptly, panic flashing across her face. You can't just leave. Mom and Dad need you. I need you. I met her gaze evenly. You've never needed me. You've used me. Her face hardened. You're unbelievable. No, I replied. I'm finally honest. She left in tears, slamming the door behind her. That night, my parents sent one final message, this time in a group email. It was long, dramatic, and framed my departure as abandonment. They warned me I'd regret this, that I was burning bridges I couldn't rebuild. I read it once. Then I archived it. They thought my silence was cruelty. In reality, it was preparation. They had no idea what was coming next. 3 weeks before my move, the truth finally caught up with them. It didn't arrive with drama or shouting. It came quietly, the way reality often does when people assume they're still in control and stop watching closely. I found out through an unexpected email from my mother's longtime friend, Linda. She'd always been polite to me, but distant, the type who watched family dynamics without intervening. Her message was brief. Claire, I thought you should know. There's been a lot of talk lately. I'm worried you're being blamed for things that aren't true. I hesitated before replying. Then I asked her what she meant. Her response was long and careful. She explained that my parents had been telling extended family and friends a very specific version of events. That I'd become cold after getting promoted. That I'd abandoned Natalie during her pregnancy. That I'd cut them off without explanation. They painted themselves as confused, heartbroken parents blindsided by their ungrateful daughter. What they didn't know was that Natalie had slipped up. She'd confided in Linda's daughter during a baby shower, complaining about how unfair it was that I refused to help financially. She'd mentioned exact numbers, the amount they'd asked me to cover. Rent, medical bills, future childcare. She'd laughed about it, assuming everyone would be on her side. Instead, it raised eyebrows, because suddenly the story wasn't about concern. It was about entitlement. Once people started asking questions, the narrative cracked. Linda told me several relatives were privately uncomfortable. Some had already suspected something was off. Others were shocked. A few were angry on my behalf. I thanked her and wished her well. I didn't ask her to defend me. I didn't need to. The shift had begun without me lifting a finger. A week later, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't blocked. My father's office line. I let it go to voicemail. "Claire," he said, his voice strained. "We need to talk. People are saying things. This is getting out of hand." I smiled faintly and deleted the message. The next call came from my aunt, the same one who'd accused me of abandoning family months earlier. "I didn't realize," she said carefully, when I finally answered. "About the money. About how much pressure they were putting on you." "I told you I had my reasons," I replied. She sighed. "I should have listened." Word spread fast after that. Not dramatically, quietly. Conversations behind closed doors. Side glances. Subtle distancing. Invitations that stopped including my parents. Support that thinned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same people who'd shamed me for setting boundaries were now setting their own. Natalie's baby shower was the breaking point. I didn't attend, obviously, but I heard about it later. About how she complained loudly about selfish siblings. About how someone finally asked her what she'd done to support herself. About how uncomfortable the room became when she admitted she hadn't worked in over a year and had no plans to start. My mother tried to smooth it over. My father changed the subject. It didn't help. For the first time, they weren't the ones controlling the room. 2 days later, my mother showed up at my apartment again. This time, she looked smaller, older, less certain. "I just want to understand," she said softly. I didn't let her in. We spoke in the hallway. "You understand perfectly," I replied. "You just don't like it." Tears filled her eyes. We were scared. "Of what?" I asked. She hesitated. "Of losing you." I held her gaze. "You lost me the moment you decided my only worth was what I could provide." She tried to argue, then stopped. For once, she had no rebuttal. "I'm moving," I reminded her. "That hasn't changed." She nodded slowly. We heard. "Good." She reached out, then lowered her hand. "Will you call?" I considered it. Maybe, if things stay respectful. She left without pushing further. On my last night in the city, I sat alone among half-packed boxes, the apartment echoing. I thought I'd feel sad, nostalgic. Instead, I felt clear. I hadn't destroyed my family. I'd exposed it. I moved to Chicago on a crisp morning, the skyline rising like a promise. My new apartment overlooked the river. My new job challenged me in ways that excited rather than drained me. My coworkers respected me. My time was my own. The calls didn't stop entirely, but they changed. No demands, no guilt, just tentative check-ins, careful questions. Natalie didn't reach out at all. 6 months later, I learned through the grapevine that my parents were helping her far more than they'd planned. That money was tight. That stress was high. That they finally understood, in a way they never had before, what they'd expected from me. I felt no joy in that. Only confirmation. Sometimes, the strongest revenge isn't proving your worth. It's refusing to let anyone define it for you again.